Thank you for joining, everyone. Today is a webinar we've put together specifically for the property sector. Property sector is one of our key sectors, a sector we've worked in for 14 or 15 years now, spanning sort of all the different subsectors in terms of sort of build to rent, build to sell, housing association, student accommodation, commercial property, a real sort of host of experience. And the premise of the webinar today is around how property companies can ultimately ensure they are responding to leads efficiently, properly, quickly, in a way that increases lead conversion and therefore revenue. Couple of bits about us before we get started. We're a HubSpot Elite partner, which is one of the the top partners in the world from a HubSpot perspective, as well as being an Umbraco Gold partner. We are sort of very data and security aware, and as such, we have ISO 27001. We're also very quality aware, and as such, ISO 9001. We're also cyber essentials. We're on G Cloud, and a lot of property organizations procure us for that reason. With the HubSpot, we're fully accredited. We have all the sort of various HubSpot accreditations needed to deliver projects of this scale. And in the property space, we work with a whole host of clients ranging from the likes of Bloor Homes, Cameron Homes, Downing, some commercial clients such as Ariga, housing associations such as Hyde, Clarion, PA Housing, built to rent such as YPP, and many clients in the sector. So I guess the first thing really here is talking about a story I know all too well when it comes to working with property clients. And very often what we see is leads that are left waiting far too long. So often what we see is sort of, particularly in the build to rent space where we see students and whatnot applying for properties. We see leads coming in of a weekend. We see leads coming in of an evening. And we see leads coming in, throughout the week. And depending on the organizational approach and sort of sales approach, we often see leads that have a massive delay, and as such, there's a much slower response. And often in this space, the sort of fastest finger wins. Competitors can often reach out quicker and sort of generate an appointment first. Something else we see a lot of is inconsistent sales process across sites. And what we mean by that is there may be a company that has a Manchester development. There may be a company that has a Leeds development. There may be a company with a London development. And depending on the individual sales offices, we can see quite different and quite inconsistent sales processes. Furthermore, when we work with property companies, we often work in a fully integrated way with the likes of Rightmove, Zoopla on the market. But often our property companies don't when they first come to us. So they're handling leads from Rightmove, leads from Zoopla. They're coming in different ways. Some are coming on a spreadsheet. Some have integration. Some don't. And as such, there's quite a cumbersome approach to lead generation across those platforms. And then I guess the final point I'm going to talk about today is how tenant churn ultimately decreases revenue, increases property voids, and sort of decreases profitability in a building. We'll start with the first pain point today, which is sort of leads left waiting too long. Now, this is a really interesting table that is sort of industry knowledge, industry expertise, and sort of well documented really around the response time in regards to responding to a lead. How quickly you respond to that lead determines the success of said lead. So if we look at the pink line in the middle, which is the baseline, organizations that respond to leads in 30 minutes typically have a 75% likelihood to qualify and a 50% likelihood of engagement with said lead. But if we go up or down on that particular table, you can see how the conversion rate and qualification rate either increases or decreases sharply. So if we use 30 minutes as a baseline, once 30 minutes passes and that lead becomes an hour, we drop from a 75% likelihood of qualification to a 40% likelihood of qualification. And furthermore, we drop from a 50% likelihood of engagement through to a 30% likelihood of engagement. If we look at the other end of the scale and we assume, perhaps not that possible, but we assume we can respond to every single lead within a minute, we increase the likelihood of qualification from 75% to 98%. We increase the likelihood of engagement from 50% to 80%, and we have a 4 times higher rate of conversion. If we look at that in a slightly nicer view and we turn that into a graph, you can see here how, responding to leads quickly increases conversion, increases engagement likelihood. So a few stats there on the left-hand side. Responding within 1 minute, as I mentioned, a 4 times higher conversion rate. Within 5 minutes, a 3 times higher conversion rate. But after 1 hour, those conversion rates drop by 75%. And if it takes 24 hours, which to be fair, is quite common, I would say around 80% of 80% of leads with companies we work with, when we first start working with them, typically there's less than 25%, typically over 80% of those leads are responded to after 24 hours. And then there's just a 5% chance of qualifying the lead or securing engagement. So as you can see, it's really important to respond quickly. Now, we believe as a HubSpot partner that you need to respond to leads in seconds. Now, obviously, that isn't necessarily something that can be done in a manual way, which is where marketing automation, sales automation, and systems come into play. There are 4 things that when a lead comes in, I believe managers of sales teams and property companies have to do. Obviously, at the moment, the first thing they have to do is assign it to the right team. So, for example, a lead comes in for a particular property in a particular area, and straight away it's okay. We know it's in Bradford, therefore the Bradford team are picking it up, but we know it's a particular development, so it's going across to this team. So there's quite a lot of thinking that has to be done to ascertain what leads sit with which teams. And then if we take that a step further, we have to make sure that the person within that team we're assigning to is actually available. We have to make sure they're not on annual leave, they're not off sick, they're not in another meeting, they're not out for lunch, they have expertise at that particular property, they're not doing another show round of an apartment, they have availability right now. We also have the compounded issue of we have to distribute leads fairly. So, we may have given one to person A, given one to person B. This one should go to person C, but they're on their lunch. What do we do? Do we wait for them? Do we give it back to person A? And there's a real logic as to ensuring we pick the right person. But ultimately, we need to engage with that particular lead immediately. We have to engage the lead immediately. We have to offer a viewing slot for a show round, for example, immediately. And if we don't, a competitor will. What we see in the industry is typically, if we look at short-term let, typically a potential tenant asks for 3.2 show arounds on average, and they're typically with competitors. So fastest finger really does win. So I guess the question is, we need you to respond in seconds. How can you do that? So as I mentioned earlier, we're a HubSpot Elite partner. We have over 400 HubSpot implementations now, many of which are in the property space. Everything I'm about to show you from this point forward is based on how you can do this in the property space using HubSpot. Now, I have a horrible diagram in front of me that I sort of mocked up earlier this week, and this for me is quite typical of a housing provider who ultimately has a whole magnitude of sort of lead routing into the business. They have Rightmove, Zoopla, On the Market, their own website, other such portals. And in our scenario, what we want to do is aggregate all of those leads and bring them into HubSpot. As I mentioned earlier, there's then a challenge around which territory, who's available, who's the next person to get a lead. But in HubSpot, we can handle all of that logic instantaneously, removing human touch and automating the entire thing. Then we can ensure that we, as that particular sales rep or lettings negotiator, for example, we can reach out to the prospect in real time with personalized email, allowing them to book a real-time appointment. And that entire thing can happen in seconds. It can happen at weekends, it can happen at evenings, it can happen at midnight, it can happen at 4 a.m. without human intervention. As I mentioned, with automated one-to-one email outreach, on the right-hand side here, you can see what we would call an email template inside HubSpot. And this won't be new to many people, but as you can see here, what we have is an email that's going to reach out to the individual who's inquired about a property on Rightmove. It's going to address them by the name we have in the system, driven by Rightmove. It's going to append the subject line with the name of the property. It's going to reference the name of the property in the actual email body. But as you can see further down that blue link, What it's going to do is offer the individual chance to book an apartment visit in real time with real availability, real diary availability, taking annual leave and everything into account. So if somebody's looking for a new property at 1 a.m. and they go to Rightmove and they fill in a lead form or they request more information, this is the email they get within about 2 minutes. Upon receiving that, they click the link for book an apartment visit, and within 3 or 4 minutes of filling in the initial inquiry form, they've booked in. Your sales manager comes into the office on Monday morning and multiple appointments have been booked over the weekend whilst your offices are closed. The real-time appointment booking I mentioned literally interacts with either your Google diaries inside the business or your Office 365 diaries, and in real time enables that instant appointment scheduling, and it reduces waiting time, improving booking rates. What's really clever is if that first email goes unresponded to, what the system will do is automatically follow up and follow up and follow up with pre-written emails to encourage progression of that lead. So for example, email 1 I showed you earlier, if there's no reply, let's say in 2 business days, we follow up with email 2. Email 2 is moving people to the next stage saying, hey, just going to follow up on that particular, on your inquiry. And, wondering if you're still looking into an appointment. We may then wait 2 more days. If no reply, we may add a phone call into the task management system of that particular sales rep. So automatically, without any intervention, the entire system can book appointments, nurture those appointments, or book appointments, and if there's no response, nurture people through the system. That's how we can speed up and ensure we can deliver, we can respond to leads in minutes. We can respond to leads in seconds and book appointments in minutes. The second issue here is having an inconsistent sales process across sites. Now, as I mentioned, this really can vary. Again, I would ask the question, does this sound familiar? Does every location in your business have its own way of doing things? Do some departments or sites have pen and paper? Some have spreadsheets, some have different systems, some keep everything on mobile phones, some use WhatsApp. Ultimately, the result there is a complete jumble of inconsistent approaches. We often find that in some cases, there isn't even a defined sales process and sort of people are there to go at it alone and sort of go quite rogue. And often what that can do is cause a mixed experience for potential tenants, with tenants receiving different levels of service, which really impacts their perception of the brand. And finally, salespeople without no defined sales process, without, the ability to understand what happens next in the sales process, that process can cause a real lack of accountability and therefore missed forecasts, missed numbers, missed targets and whatnot. Here's a couple more stats around the benefit of having a defined sales process. So companies with a formal sales process see 28% higher revenue growth compared to those without. Companies that have consistency across sales teams achieve an 18% higher win rate. Companies that have consistent sales processes and consistent follow-up processes have a 30% increase in conversion. Companies that have a formal forecasting process see a 15% higher accuracy in sales forecasting. And ultimately, all of that combined with an enhanced customer experience, 60% of buyers are more likely to trust companies. So I mentioned before, we can do this all in HubSpot. And I showed the front end of this system, so sort of leads coming in and coming all the way to appointment. Now I'm going to talk about some of the functionality within HubSpot that allows appointments to be followed through to closed-won business and contracts. So where HubSpot really wins is in a really simple, clean interface that ultimately allows people to progress sales through a sort of Kanban view. Now, in this particular example I've done here, this is each individual stage of a sales pipeline. And as a solutions partner, an elite solutions partner, we architect this around the needs of your business. So as an inquiry comes in, it might end in that first column you can see on the left-hand side there. And as we progress deals through the pipeline, we can set up triggers, we can set up automation, and all of that ultimately means that every single person receives the exact same process. We can improve sales performance with a consistent sales process. The third pain point is juggling multiple platforms for lead tracking. And I've spoken a lot about Rightmove, On the Market, Zoopla. And often what we see, I've intentionally went to Google to find a horrific looking spreadsheet here, but often what we see is very inconsistent and manual tracking, often in spreadsheets, sometimes not even in spreadsheets, which makes it difficult to manage leads across multiple sources and ultimately means you're prone to errors, delays, and missed follow-ups. What HubSpot brings is one single source of truth. So what you see on the right here is a lead dashboard that every individual in a business can have to understand where all of their leads are up to, which ones have progressed, which ones are hot, which ones are cold, where they're up to in the sales process, and how they can be progressed. And it gives complete access to all correspondence and account activity. Furthermore, what we can give is customer attribution tools that really allow you to understand the customer journey. So this Sankey chart here as a demonstration would allow you to understand, what are my top performing channels? Does Rightmove generate more revenue than Zoopla? Does Zoopla generate more appointments, but maybe less no-shows, for example, than On the Market? And we can drill into this even further. We can identify top performing territories, teams, channels, and we can visualize the conversion points and optimize the journey accordingly. In delivering a consistent sales process across all property portals, we can increase lead conversion, increase revenue, and increase sales velocity. The final point I'm going to talk about today is lost revenue from tenant churn. Now, we see this all too often where a tenant moves out unexpectedly, a void period begins, there are still costs associated to maintaining that property. And ultimately, there are sudden tenant departures. Empty units linger too long. It costs you a lot of money to refill a unit, not just in cleaning and maintenance and decoration, but also in the cost of marketing that unit again and putting it back on the market and PPC and biddable media and website costs and whatnot. And ultimately, it's quite disruptive. You have a sales team who are working in a particular way, and then suddenly there's a void unit and it must be filled quite quickly. And again, there's a fix for this. So what we have here is a couple of different stats from sort of really high quality sources in terms of Gallup, Bain, Forrester, SurveyMonkey. Companies that do regular check-ins reduce churn by up to 63%. High NPS scores correlate with a 2x increase in retention rates. Customer satisfaction surveys increase retention by 25%, and proactive support lowers churn by 15 to 20%. So there's a whole host of tools in the HubSpot ecosystem and in the HubSpot platform that allow all of this to take place. Before we get into that, I'm going to talk about the concept of NPS. So for those that don't know, NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, and it's a universally known sort of way of ranking how much do our customers like us? How much would they recommend us to a friend and whatnot? And what we do every quarter is we send a simple survey to tenants that says, hey, would you recommend us to a friend? On a scale of 1 to 10, would you recommend us to a friend? And they pick a number between 0 and 10. And what Net Promoter Score does, it takes everybody who classifies 0 to 6, it turns them into what's called a detractor. It takes everybody who scores 7 and 8 and calls them a passive, and everybody who scores 9 and 10 and calls them a promoter. That then gives you a score, which is the percentage of promoters take away the percentage of detractors. So it ignores the passives in the middle and gives a score. And that score can be anything from -100 to +100. When we start with organizations who are tracking NPS for the first time, typically they rank lower than 0. They rank as a negative. A world-class NPS is classed as 75 positive, and it's very, very I wouldn't say difficult to get there, but it requires wholesale change often in businesses to strive to a world-class Net Promoter Score. But ultimately, higher Net Promoter Scores equal less churn and equals less void units. So we can track Net Promoter Scores in HubSpot. We can handle the surveys inside HubSpot. We can run that regular cadence again automatically without human interaction or within HubSpot. But furthermore, there are more customer surveys we can run. There are CSAT surveys, which allow us to understand overall customer satisfaction levels. And there are CES surveys, which allow us to track how easy it is for customers to interact with us. So as an example, let's say we carry out a repair on somebody's boiler in a property. We can automatically send a survey asking how that went. Once we've onboarded a new tenant and we've given them keys to a property, again, we can automatically send them a survey asking how that part of the process went. By automating this and by asking questions at every touch point, we can A, assess for tenant satisfaction, B, gain an understanding as to if we think there is a decline in satisfaction and therefore an increase in churn, and C, we can spot problems before they arise or as they arrive to ensure we can address them, meet with the tenant, put the situation right, and reduce churn. Furthermore, within HubSpot, we have the ability to launch knowledge bases. A knowledge base ultimately is a self-service portal that allows tenants to ask questions and get instant answers to common queries. So as an example, let's say we have a particular apartment block, and let's say there is bike storage in the basement and a tenant wants to understand how they can access it. Instead of ringing your call center, instead of coming to your office inside the building, instead of going through sort of an email process that might take 3, 4, 5 days to reach a resolution, they simply go to a form, they start typing in their requirements, the knowledge base comes back with information that's relevant, and that tenant is self-served. What this does is reduces support demand and allows your staff to focus on more complex requirements. But then something that's really new and really topical right now within HubSpot is we have the ability to deploy AI support agents. An AI support agent is something that will operate like live chat. It isn't a bot. It isn't something that feels like a bot that leaves somebody typing, speak to a human. But instead what it is a support agent that is completely driven by our AI, answers as a human, answers in your tone of voice based on the information it's scraped from your website, from your blog, from your knowledge base, and responds based on the information it's learned from your knowledge base, from your website, from your collateral. So ultimately what we get is 24/7, 365 support tailored for tenants in a way that is instant, accurate, and as I mentioned earlier, frees up human agents to focus on more complex issues. And we believe that happy tenants equal occupied units. So as I mentioned, there's a number of ways you can fix this. One, you have to provide instant lead response to reduce waiting time. 2, you have to standardize sales process across sites. 3, you have to unify lead channels. And 4, you have to be proactive with your engagement, minimizing tenant churn. And if you go on and do these 4 things, for the first block there, those that have instant lead response times can see a 9 times increase in conversion. Those that standardize sales processes across sites can have a 28% increase in revenue. Those that unify incoming lead channels from Rightmove, Zoopla, on the market can see a 30% higher response rate. And those that are proactive with their engagement with a goal of minimizing tenant churn can reduce that churn by up to 35%. So we've been Fulius today. As I mentioned, all of this can be done with HubSpot, with Fulius. Fulius's expertise is unrivaled in this space. We have our proprietary systems where we as an organization have built Rightmove, Zoopla, on the market, prime location. We've built those integrations amongst others. And as such, when you work with Fulius, you gain years of expertise, but you also gain out-the-box integrations that work for housing companies like yourselves. Thank you.